I'm sure you know the raging debate between painters, loose versus tight. And I'm sure that this divide is inside each and every one of us. Have you ever felt stuck painting too tight when you want to be more loose, or maybe your brushwork gets too wild and you need more control? Well, today I'm going to share my secret technique to shift between tight and loose painting on demand. It all comes down to the relation between the paint quantity on your brush and the brush pressure, as well as the brush angle. So let's break it down. So first, let's start with a very quick definition. What is tight and what is loose? Simply speaking, tight in a painting is when no trace of the painter's hand is left visible on the canvas in the end. So basically, you polish and you blend until you can't see any visible brush marks in the end. And loose is when you have visible brush marks. Typically, a tight painting will produce something more precise, more sharp, with a sort of a higher level of resolution, whereas something loose produces something more spontaneous and organic that has more a quote-unquote painterly feeling. The most important thing is this a stylistic choice? Is this something that you wake up in the morning and decide, do I want to be tight or loose? Overall, I think that no, it's not really a choice. It's very deeply connected to your personality, your worldview, your interests, your artistic tastes, and your history as an artist. And you don't really get to decide, but it doesn't mean that one can't learn from the other side. I think the best thing to do is not to pick a side and be ideologically stuck on one side. I want to be tight, I want to be loose. Be on the fence, enjoy being a hybrid, and use the best qualities of tight or loose styles when needed. Which means that if you consider yourself to be a tight painter, you will learn a lot from trying out and practicing doing painting as it is done on the other side. And if you consider yourself to be a loose painter, sometimes you might want to tighten things out and bring more focus, bring more depth into a painting, and bring more precision maybe. Tight versus loose doesn't have to be a divide among painters. It can also be a divide among your own collection of paintings. And this switch of style can also be put to use inside a single painting. Why not have the face, for example, pretty tight, and then the clothes in the background relatively loose? That could be a nice combination. And this will naturally guide the viewer's eye towards the area that you want to focus on. This means that the best thing to do is to practice both things. You want to practice a variety of exercises, and this is what we do in the Atelier of figurative arts. Sometimes we do alla prima, and alla prima is more often leaning towards the loose side. And some other times we do multi-layered techniques with a complex architecture of layers, with a grisaille and underpainting and overpainting, glazing and stuff. And while I painted all these demonstrations that we do in the Atelier with so much variety, those repeated exercises have forced me to be capable of switching sides easily. It's almost like having a little slider between tight and loose, and you have to adjust on the fly. And being able to adjust your approach like that on the fly and on demand is the best type of painting skill that you might want. So the number one thing that I would advise is to still practice both. And even if your main painting style is always to be more on the loose side or on the tight side, and I'm personally more on the tight side, my personal style is more leaning towards tightness than looseness, but I still practice and I still do a lot of exercises that kind of keep me more on the loose side every once in a while, so that I never forget those crucial brush handling techniques that can be so helpful both for tight painters and loose painters. And I'm gonna tell you my technique that helps me adjust being loose or tight on demand. Alright, so the whole concept of my technique is this: understanding how much paint your brush is capable of carrying, and understanding what kind of pressure and angle applying it on the canvas will leave as a mark. So it's all about the relation between the paint quantity and the brush stroke. You really have to connect those two, and it's going to help you understand how you can proceed if you want to leave the mark visible, or how you can proceed if you want to erase the mark and make sure that the mark is not visible in the end. So with the same concept, connecting paint quantity and brush stroke, we can adjust. If we want to leave the mark visible, we can do so. And if we want to erase it and blend it until the brush mark is not visible anymore, we can make it so that we can make it both loose or tight on demand. Let's say you want to be more loose. In that case, you want to have more paint on your brush. You want something more buttery, more expressive. And the key notion here is that you want to pick up exactly enough paint on your brush to make it happen with 3 decisive strokes max. If it was a spoon, how much would you be scooping with your brush? And this is super important to understand that, because with a loose brush style, you really want to make it happen with less than 3 strokes before you go back to the palette to pick up some more fresh paint. More than that is going to start to denature the strokes, and it's going to start to blend them with the rest of the paint and make them less visible. Typically, the more strokes you apply and the less visible they are. On the other hand, if you want something tight, you generally want less paint. You want paint that's a little drier, less fluid, so that you can control it more, and you want something that's less textured so that you can really blend until it's not visible anymore. It's often the case that a tight approach will be conducive to something that's a little bit more on the dull side. The more brushworks you apply and the more the paint will lose a little bit of vibrancy and it will feel a little more overworked. For tight painters, overworking is not really a critical notion because it's often compensated with subsequent layers. For example, if you're a tight painter and you paint with like 5 to 6 layers and then add glazes, of course, the initial vibrancy that you've lost by overworking will be compensated later on with the glazes, the scumbling, all those little effects that you do. When you want to go for something more loose, you don't have the option of correcting in the next layer. So you really have to make it happen with the 3 first strokes before going back to the palette. So this was the first part. We need to understand the quantity of paint on the brush. How much paint is the brush capable of carrying? But next, it's all about how does it apply to the canvas. And this is where pressure and angle and swiftness come in motion. Let's talk about the pressure of the brush on your canvas. How hard do you press? If you want to paint loose, if you want those juicy impasto, you want to paint lightly. You want to press very lightly. You want something airy, delicate, and effortless. This is how you're going to maintain the texture of the paint as a material object visible on the surface of your canvas. If you press more than that, it will create more friction, giving you more control, but also making the paint tighter. So if you want those juicy impasto strokes that stay visible in the end, you want to press lightly. Very often this is a problem, especially for beginners. They think that you have to press harder on the brush. It's actually the opposite. If you want those heavy impasto, you have to press lightly. On the other hand, if you want something tight and if you want to make those brush strokes disappear, you want to press harder. So remember this, loose equals light and tight equals heavy. Of course, when we talk about the pressure, we also need to talk about the angle at which you hold the brush. So if you hold your brush flat like that against your canvas, you can caress the surface with less pressure, creating broader and more expressive marks. So this would be for loose. If you hold it upright, more like a pencil, it will create something sharp with more detailed strokes, and eventually it will create something tighter. So about the angle, think about feathering the canvas is for loose and holding it as a pencil is for tight styles. Finally, we also need to talk about the quickness of the motion because it also plays a role. Obviously, you want to go a little bit faster and be more decisive if you want something loose. And if you want something tight, In that case, you want to really take your time and go slower, because this kind of slower motion is going to give you more pressure, more control, and it's going to make all those brush marks disappear and blend naturally. So let's recap. Loose is with a big quantity of paint on the brush with light pressure, a flat angle, and quick motion. On the other hand, tight is with a small quantity of paint on the brush with strong pressure, pencil-like angle, and a relatively slower movement. So here it is. This is my secret technique to switch between tight and loose painting on demand. Try it in your next painting and let me know in the comments. Also, if you found this helpful, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one. Check out this video next, and as always, my friends, joy and inspiration to you. Bye.